Now, I was told based on David's comment this morning that I needed to make sure, since they were sitting off here on the side, that they weren't passing notes or anything, Peggy. So you'll have to, I don't know if you listened to your husband's sermon this morning or not, but evidently we don't want them passing notes over there. If you saw the title of my lesson tonight, I called it Temptations of the Times. And some of the things I want to talk about are, I call it Temptation of the Times because that has a kind of an alliteration to it, but really may think of it more as challenges or dangers of the times that we're in. I don't know if you've noticed, I'm pretty sure it's still there. I think it was at least last week on the slides that show before our lessons. You know what our theme of this year was? Yeah, 2020 vision in 2020. You know, how well did that work out? You know, when we thought, and I'm sure given 2020, we weren't the only ones that had some kind of theme like that, and as we looked at this year. But, you know, at the beginning of 2020, who knew what was going to be happening? You know, there's at least three external forces that have had really tremendous impact, not to mention individual trials and different things that people are going through. But I think at a societal level, there's at least three external forces that we've been, you know, coming together that have been changing and challenging this year. One, obviously, is the COVID situation. Why this is our first Sunday night service at the building in 6 months or so. So we've had the coronavirus. We've had, as Paul mentioned in his prayer, we call it social justice or civil unrest, whatever you want to call that has been going on in the country. And then we have the political cycle. Especially given it's a presidential election year, and the additional stress that has been, you know, and those three things seem to wrap around each other, you know, especially from a political standpoint. And as we think about that, for 2020, you know, as we've had all these plans for the year, the words of James come to mind. You know, on Sunday morning, the Bible school times, Andy's covering James. We haven't got to chapter 4 yet, but I'm sure it'll come up as we get into that. But James chapter 4, beginning verse 13, says, "Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go into such a town, and spend a year there, and trade and make a profit. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that." Obviously, that holds true, and I think we've learned that lesson in this year more than perhaps any than definitely in recent memory, and maybe even in our lifetime, of, you know, not getting too ahead of ourselves in our plan, and remember that God is in control. And as we think about these things, another verse that comes to mind is Galatians 6:9. "And let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not." Because this year has brought these struggles. How do we ensure that we faint not and not grow weary in well-doing, not just in doing good things, but in living the Christian life? You know, the struggles of this year have had aspects that are good and bad. I'll just look at the coronavirus situation on the good side or the positive side, especially early. There was this time to slow down. And I think everybody kind of realized how fast-paced our life was, and we're always doing this or that and busy. Even in our congregation, we have so many things going on that sometimes we can get close to burnout or just so busy. And especially early on, COVID said, all right, slow down. Don't have a choice. I'm going to slow down, and I'm going to enjoy that slowdown. Maybe it created more family time. I've talked with people of our congregation and said, you know what, we've had more meals around the table together than we've had in years. And so there are some good things. We also may have learned what we can do without. You know, I was talking to my brother yesterday on the phone. We both kind of realized, you know, we're both kind of sportsaholics, and said, you know what, kind of makes you realize, you know, I still like sports, but I've done without them for 6 months, so maybe I'm not as dependent on them as I maybe had gotten to be. I can miss them. You know, other hobbies. Another positive thing, maybe you've saved some money because you're not eating out, that you're not traveling, that you're not going to movies over the last 6 months. So maybe you saved some money. Maybe that's a good thing. But obviously there's some bad things that have happened with COVID. Maybe some have lost their jobs or at least had their income reduced. At the societal level, there's been an increase in suicides and divorce and other types of abuse that we've seen as the stress of the quarantines and the isolation. And I think in a lot of cases these were heightened stresses that were just below the surface that may have been there anyway. Now that you stripped away the things that could cover them up. There's many lessons that we can take from this year. But tonight I want to focus on a few of the dangers, 3 dangers that I've seen of the times that we're in, and they could be thought of as temptations. And I'm going to do a little self-confession here. Each of these things I'm going to talk about, I've had knock on my door during the last 6 months. And I'll be very surprised if most, if not all of you can maybe say the same thing. So these times can challenge, they can make or break our faith when we struggle in times like this. So the first thing I want to talk about is aloneness. And notice I didn't say loneliness. I said aloneness. The first time that the word alone is used in the Bible, Genesis chapter 2. It is not good, God said, it is not good for man to be alone. That's the first time alone is. The very first time we read of it is, hey, this isn't a good thing. God designed man for companionship. We're told to bear one another's burdens. How can we bear one another's burdens when we're alone? There are so many different one another's. I did a sermon one time, just all the different one another's in the Bible, the things we're supposed to do with one another, just from the simple the greeting one another to the bearing one another's burdens. How can we do the one another things when we're alone? However, there are times when being alone is needed. Multiple times in Jesus' ministry, it says he went to be alone. He went in the mountains to pray. You can see that prayer time, the meditation. Matthew chapter 6, we're instructed to pray alone. We need to be in private. So there are times that being alone is a positive thing, is a good thing, but it's when it's our choice, when we have it for a specific purpose. When we're forced into aloneness, it can have some of the opposite effects. It can really cause us to struggle. As I mentioned, I see aloneness as different than loneliness. Loneliness, I kind of think of as missing the companionship of others. Aloneness is feeling like there is no one else. And even in today's world, in these times, even if we intellectually know that, hey, everybody's still around, emotionally we can be alone, a feeling like there's no one else. And it may be not just you individual, but maybe it's your family unit, because you are there in your house with your family, but you don't see anybody else. So now it's your family. We're alone. And that really can be a struggle. If you think about Elijah, one of the other times that we can think of that's really emphasized about aloneness, in Romans, when Paul was writing and referencing back to Elijah, in Romans chapter 11, verse 3, he recounts how Elijah, in a time of emotional distress, down and struggles, Elijah made this comment. He said, "Lord, they have killed your prophets, they have demolished your altars, and I alone am left, and they seek my life." This is probably the lowest time in Elijah's life. And why was it the low time in his life? Because he thought he was alone. I'm all that is left. And whether we, again, intellectually realize there's plenty of people out there, but when we're forced into the aloneness of much of the last 6 months, it can cause us to feel like we are all that there is. But what was God's reply to Elijah? We read in verse 4, God's reply to Elijah. He said, "I have kept for myself 7,000 men who have not bowed the knee to Baal." We must remind ourselves and help others know that we are not alone. Now, we sing a song where no man stands alone. When we think about no man standing alone in that song, we often are really of the mindset, I'm not alone because God is with me. And that is true. We need to take comfort in knowing that God is with us. But we also need to take comfort and help others to gain comfort from knowing that we're not alone individually as well, in terms of our family, our godly family, the church family, other Christians, that we are not alone. Even if we're not able to see each other individually all the time, that we're there in prayer, we're there in our minds, we're there hopefully in phone calls and reaching out in different ways. So it's not just thinking about, we do need to gain comfort that knowing God is with us. But you notice God's comfort to Elijah. When Elijah said, I'm the only one left, God didn't say, don't worry, I'm with you. Now, other times, obviously, God talks about the benefits of that you aren't alone when he's with you. But notice that's not how he gave Elijah that encouragement. He said, hey, I've got 7,000 others. You're not alone as a man. You're not alone. There are other people like you. There are other people who want to follow God and gain strength from that. Elijah couldn't see those 7,000. Just as much of the last 6 months, we might not have been able to see our 100 here tonight or 200 on Sunday morning. We might not have been able to see those others. But God said, they're there, and we need to remember that we're there. How do we deal with this? First, like any problem, what's the first step in dealing with any problem? That's recognizing that it exists. So we need to recognize that being alone is a trial and a temptation, because as we're talking about what comes into the temptation, it's a temptation for the faith to be weakened. It's a temptation that Satan can take advantage of. So first we need to recognize it. We need to reach out in both directions, not only just reaching out to people so that we can talk to those who may be alone, but if you're feeling alone, you need to reach out as well. So we need to reach out in both directions. I actually had a phone conversation in the last week or so with one of our members. I won't mention them by name, but they made the comment that they don't know how it warmed my heart when they said it, but they said, I may live alone, but that doesn't mean I am alone. And that needs to be our attitude. That needs to be our mindset. And that allows us to get over the temptations that come with aloneness. Again, not loneliness, but the temptations that come with being alone. The second one I wanted to mention tonight is emptiness. Over the last 6 months, many of the things that define us were taken away. The church assembly, being here together for a period of time, is taken away. It may be your job was taken away, at least the way you knew your job, being in person, being in the office, or being around your coworkers. Your extended family. Many had to go many weeks or months without seeing extended family. Travel. Maybe you're someone who traveled a lot or likes to travel. That was taken away. I mentioned sports earlier, taken away. Hobbies were taken away. So many, if not most, of the things that a year ago, if we'd have said, what defines you? Obviously, hopefully our answer to that would have been our Christianity. But when you get past that, all right, the things in your life that kind of define who you are based on what you do and your influences on a daily basis, most of those things were wiped out 6 months ago. And that can create emptiness. And Jesus spoke about this. Jesus taught about the dangers of emptiness. And specifically, let's look at Matthew chapter 12 and the parable of the demons returning. This is one, I don't know, I was trying to find the name of this parable, and one of the headings was the parable of the demons returning. That's not a very good name of a parable, but I don't know if there's a better name out there. But look at Matthew chapter 12, beginning in verse 43. When the unclean spirit has gone out of a person, it passes through waterless places seeking rest, but finds none. Then it says, I will return to my house from which I came. And when it comes, he finds the house empty, swept, and put in order. Then it goes and brings with it 7 other spirits more evil than itself, and they enter and dwell there. And the last state of that person is worse than the first. So also will it be with this evil generation." And what does this parable mean? This is one, I don't know about you, but there's certain parables that we read that Jesus taught that as a 5-year-old, you can hear that parable and okay, I know what it's talking about there. Then there are other parables that you say, well, wait a minute. What does that mean? And it kind of takes more maturity or more understanding or reasoning to understand. And this is one for me that I looked at it and I remember being younger and thinking, wait a minute, the house was swept and everything in order? What things are good? What's the problem here? Why is Jesus talking about this being a bad thing when the house was in order? But then you start realizing what he's talking about. The evil spirit left the person. The house was empty, swept, and put in order. The person that evil spirit was in just left everything. They didn't fill that void. That void, when that evil spirit left, it created a void. What happens with that void? This person, this generation he's talking about, didn't do anything about it, just left it there empty. So then the spirit comes back and says, this isn't pretty good. Not only is it empty, but it's put in order. Everything's a little bit more convenient. I'll invite some of my friends, and I will come in. If we leave ourselves empty, we will be filled by something. And Satan is quick to come in and do that. There's a saying that nature abhors a vacuum. And from physics, the engineers in the room, those who remember your high school science, you may remember that if there's a vacuum, nature doesn't, it's going to be filled with something. So it's not enough to put sin away. We must be filled with the spiritual. And a lot of times we think about that in terms of sin, but if you think about the last 6 months, pretty much all the things I described as becoming more empty in our lives, those were not sinful things. None of the things I mentioned were sinful things. So sometimes we may think, well, if I'm putting sin out, I need to be filling it with something. But here we were putting other things in our life out. And there is still the need to be filled with something, or else there's a danger there when our daily routine leaves us empty. So what happened when the things that define you were taken away? Did you take the opportunity to read your Bible, fill it with spiritual things? And again, a little bit of self-confession here. I can tell you the first 2 months of COVID, this is one of the years, I don't do it every year, but this was one of the years I'm going to read through the whole Bible this year. That's just one of the things I'd planned for 2020. And when the gap in COVID came along, wow, I just jumped. I was way ahead of schedule. And then what happened? Other things started to creep in. Maybe as other things started to come back into the life, what did it push out? Some of the things I was doing. I'm still ahead a little bit, but not as much as I was. Maybe you read it, you filled it with other reading. Or did you fill it with binge watching TV? A little bit guilty of that. Especially those first few weeks. If you never heard of a show called Top Shot, it's one of these survival things where they shoot a bunch of different things. We saw all 4 seasons of that. Watching saw old seasons of Alone. I just finished watching the first season of Designated Survivor. I thought that was a cool little story plot to there. So did we start doing those things? I have to confess, I tried to watch Tiger King, but because I heard so much about it, but I did not make it through that. I think it's an honor to say I did not make it through that. But did we start filling ourselves with things? Did we get on social media more? Did we get on the internet more? Did we play more video games? Did we do other things to try to fill that void? Or did we fill it with more spiritual things and recognize that when we're empty, we need to fill our lives with the spiritual? There's an old example. I think I've probably used it here before, but I still remember. I can't even remember where I heard it the first time. I can't remember if it was work or a church or some type of speaker, but he was talking about the things that get in our minds and how our mind can never be empty. And he gave the example of, he said, have you ever watched a really scary movie and it's right at bedtime and you just see this real scary movie and it's gotten to the point just scaring you and you know you're not going to be able to sleep? What's the best thing to do? And the first response by most people is turn it off. And the speaker said, if you said turn it off, that's the second best answer. The best answer is to turn the channel. Because if you turn it off, what is your mind filled with? Everything that you just saw. Turning the channel lets you turn it to Andy Griffith, and Mayberry lets you fill it with something a little bit more wholesome, and let that be what sinks in to your mind. So something to think about, the temptation of emptiness and what we will be filled with is out there in the times we're living in, and especially as we're starting to fill it back now with more routine. Let's don't let those empty things be just filled with the trivial. So as we continue to refill more of our lives, let's be careful with what we fill it with. Then the third thing I wanted to mention this evening is conceding, or giving up. And this may be in some ways maybe even I think all these are tough, but in some ways this one can be tough as well. You know, there's been many things in this year to cause conflict and tension across all type of relationships. You know, even among fellow Christians. So there's been tension that could be created among family, friends, you know, job situations, but even among fellow Christians. And the things that I talked about earlier have created tensions and created sides. You know, COVID situation. What's the best way to respond to COVID? And you end up with people taking sides, and you know, people that are alike in almost every other situation may be at one end of the spectrum when it comes to the coronavirus situation. The social justice movements have created tension and feelings and emotions across a spectrum. You know, good people can disagree based on the things that are going on. We're in the middle of the political season, especially with the president, but other major offices up for re-election, and we know that can cause tension. There are reasons why people feel the way they do, and people feel strongly in those things. And all these things can create tension among brethren. Well, what can this cause as a temptation? Obviously, there's some temptations that can arise in terms of the tongue or in anger or things like that. But the one I wanted to speak of tonight is, and again, each of these I felt at least knock on my door, and that is the temptation of just giving up. You know, why is that a temptation? It's sometimes a temptation that it's just not worth it. I'm going to be better off not to care. You know, it's just easier to walk away, live my life, and not even care about anybody else. If people are going to get mad this way or people are going to get mad that way, why bother? Why care? And I think that can be a danger for Christians as we try to live the Christian life. Christian life is about caring about one another, caring about what's best for people, caring about our relationship. And with all the things going on, it can create situations where we feel like we're just going to get hurt, or I can't do anything right. And I think some people in the world just use that as a time to give up. I'm just going to live my life, just do my own and just mind my own business and not put myself out there at all. But we know we can't have that as a Christian. We are there to care. We are there to have a relationship. You know, even in normal times, this can be a trouble. In normal times, we can have stresses that can cause us to just throw our hands up and say, I quit. But we can't have that in today's world, because the world needs Christians to not quit. Our congregation needs members to not quit. You know, sometimes we think, well, I just rather avoid the pain. You know, a few years, maybe it's the most famous of Garth Brooks' song, The Dance. You know, if you know that song, you know the point of the song is a lost love, a broken relationship. And the main line in the song, I could have missed the pain, but I'd have had to miss the dance. In other words, I could not have the pain of that relationship, but only way of not having that pain would have been if I'd never had that relationship to begin with. And in this context, there's some truth about that in the Christian life. The pains that we struggle through as a congregation and different opinions and trying to live with different opinions and trying to live with the right relationships among us as Christians, sometimes it can be a pain. It can be hard. But instead of giving up, say, well, wait a minute, I could do without that pain, but to do without the pain, I'd have to give up this. And we know I'd rather live with the pain than not have the relationship of Jesus Christ and not have the relationship of my fellow Christians. So we can let our discouragement or disappointment lead to concession, lead to just giving up. And I'm convinced that has happened to some people in the times that we're living in. As we mentioned in the beginning, each of these has touched all of us, I think, to some degree. So when we find ourselves tempted to give up, let's instead give up on the things that are hindrances. So giving up itself is not bad, as long as we're giving up means we're giving up the things that are hindrances. As Hebrews chapter 12 mentions in verse 1, right after talking about in chapter 11, all the honor roll of faith, as we call it sometimes, he said, "Let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us." Let's don't give up on our Christianity. Let's don't give up on the spiritual. Let's give up on the hindrances, the sin that so easily besets us. This has been a tough year and creates temptations and trials. But also sometimes we are influenced by the immediate, the things most recently in our past. Is 2020 really that different? Right now we say, 2020 is really different. There's never been a year like this before. Well, maybe in some ways, yes. None of us dealt with the shutdown of society, maybe as we've seen with COVID. But have we had periods of social unrest before? Let's look at these items of the social unrest that we're seeing. Maybe those under 50 haven't seen anything quite like we are right now. But ask somebody that's older about the 1960s. Anybody? I was alive in the 60s, but a little too young to remember most of the things. But ask somebody that's 10 years older than me about the 60s, about Kent State and National Guard actually shooting college students. And I'm not taking sides but just the unrest, the social unrest has been in the past. Have we mentioned the COVID, the shutdown of society? Well, we haven't seen anything like COVID. Well, I remember my mom, people talk about the Spanish flu, and I don't know, but none of us were around, 1918 or whatever people talk about. But I do remember my mom talking about polio in the heyday of the polio, that summers, pools were shut down, theaters were shut down. There were several summers where you didn't go out. Everything was shut down because of the polio virus. Have we had divided elections in the past? Absolutely. Sometimes you just wonder, maybe we just aren't doing a very good job of teaching history anymore. Political conflict. Have you watched the play Hamilton? What was going on there? Politicians in duels shooting and killing each other. Have we seen political unrest before? We've seen, a civil war might happen. Well, it was the political environment of the 1850s and early 1860s that led to literal civil war. So, there may be things that we haven't seen, but there's been all these things that have happened in the past, as we read in the Bible, nothing new under the sun. And there's other years in your life that didn't go the way you thought they would, that had unexpected turn of events. For anybody that's 30, 35 years old or older, You remember 9/11. We're still feeling the effects of 9/11 today. Just go to the airport. The number of things that have influenced. And remember, I think that was 2001. That year was different. The unexpected happened. Years that had the loss of a loved one. Outside of the things I've talked about tonight, many in the audience have had family members pass away. That wasn't expected this year. That's not how this year was supposed to go. So many, will mark 2020 as reference years for the things we've talked about, but for others, 2020 will be remembered by that loss of a loved one. So I think what we can look at in 2020, it's a reminder that the world is not our home, that the things we've gone through, that's, life is going to have its unexpected challenges. This one seems worse than most, but if the world continues until we die or until the Lord comes again, we're going to have unexpected challenges. The going through time, and I'm sure it's like you, there's different Bible verses or passages that over time, in a given time, this is my new favorite verse or passage, there's another favorite one, and things, those come and go. But one lately that has really hit home with me is Psalm 46. And I'd like to read Psalms 46 as we wrap up. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved to the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam through the mountains tremble and its swelling. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God will help her. I rewrote this myself, and I can't read my own writing. God will help her in the morning as the morning dawns. The nations rage, the kingdoms totter. He utters his voice, the earth melts. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Come, behold the works of the Lord, how he has brought desolations on the earth. He makes woes cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the chariots with fire. And then especially verses 10 and 11. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. As we look at this year, let's use it as a reminder that this world is not our home. If we are living for Christ, we will never be alone. If we are filled with the Spirit, our lives will never be empty. And let us run the race and never give up. If you have any needs tonight, whether it's struggles you're going through that we can help with as a congregation, or if you have any needs to become a Christian tonight, we invite you to come as we stand and sing.